Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. Crestview Strategy, as we put forward our opinions and our analysis of the provincial budget, the Alberta provincial budget that was tabled by Finance Minister Travis Toews yesterday afternoon. A lot of information to break down in that budget, and we have a fantastic panel of experts here to speak with you today about that. In the Edmonton office, we have Bill Anderson, a vice president in our government relations practice. And in Calgary, we have Taleesha Thorogood, as well as Evan Menzies, with us today to break this all down. The budget, now it's a surplus budget, it's a balanced budget, $2.4 billion surplus in this one, but the spending is up significantly and in some key departments as well. Spending is up in health, it is up in education. We saw an announcement today, a number of school projects moving forward, construction projects. They're talking about hiring more teachers, more education assistants, and so on. In healthcare, they're talking about recruitment, increasing primary care, and breaking down and shortening the surgical wait list. Let's get right into this with our experts. Bill, I want to talk to you first. As I mentioned, it's a $2.4 billion surplus with big spending increases and a promise to pay down the debt and save for rainy days. Has the UCP tabled a budget here you think that will come across as a win for the party in the spring's election?
Look, I think they have. It's no secret that this is a pre-election budget, right? And you look at significant investments in areas like healthcare. Today's announcement around school building and education, other investments that are I think laid out in a very robust capital plan that I think clearly signal this government's intention to be investing in communities and investing in priorities that we know matter to voters in the context of an imminent election.
We are heading into an election that's hanging over all of this. It is now 3 months away, the end of May. We're now at the start of March. Obviously, the parties are developing their policy platforms. Taleesha, when you look in this budget, do you see something that they can campaign with, or do you expect to see big ideas, new ideas, and a fresh perspective coming out of that campaign document?
Yeah, so I would say that, they've focused entirely on the issues that Albertans care about right now, which are healthcare, as Bill said, and I would even argue affordability, which a lot of that was announced right after Premier Smith took the Premier's chair in the fall. The government really is hoping to demonstrate that not only can they win on those issues and that they're going to be the best suited to support Albertans on those issues in this time, but also that they are the government that people can trust going in. They're trying to come across as predictable, stable, and what people can, actually trust in the 4 years ahead. They also gave increased money for municipalities after 4 years of people, kind of being upset about how they have cut funding for municipalities. I don't expect that, the budget changes much in terms of kind of the polling that we're seeing right now or the election fortunes that the UCP are seeing. Battleground Calgary as well. We saw lots of money going specifically into Calgary, and I think that was highly intentional. They really wanted to focus on areas and targeted seats. There wasn't a lot of money going into safe seats, which was highly intentional in how they framed the budget.
It's not lost on me that it is now March of 2023, 3 years ago this month. Obviously, the pandemic was setting in, and we heard a comment from the finance minister yesterday, Travis Toews, where he says March 2020 left an indelible impression on him. The budget, the money just dried up. He said we couldn't borrow money. We saw the deficit balloon to record levels that we had never seen in this province before and really across the world. And he said we need to prepare just in case something like this happens again. So we're seeing this new fiscal framework. This fiscal framework will mandate balanced budgets with some exceptions. There will be limits on spending increases, capping it to inflation plus population growth, as well as a spelled out way to use future surpluses, paying down debt and then saving in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund and spending on things, maybe one-time purchases, one-time spending options, but won't add long-term costs to the budget. Evan, I want to talk to you about this because this all sounds very familiar from the Wild Rose days, does it not?
Yeah, it sure does. For folks who can remember back to when Ed Stelmach was premier, he lost a couple of MLAs. One of them was Rob Anderson, who now serves Premier Danielle Smith up in Edmonton. And one of the major pieces that he worked on an opposition MLA with Wild Rose, and then became a key feature of the Wild Rose platform in 2012, were some of these pieces we saw in the budget yesterday. making sure that the Heritage Fund is being resupplied as opposed to going to general revenue, that it's being reinvested into the fund. That was an old talking point that was hammered away home more than a decade ago. These strategies around how to manage surpluses, so the temptation for government isn't to make permanent new spending, but rather put away that into different savings portfolios. So these are ideas that Danielle and her advisor Rob have had in their back pocket for a long time. I think they're good ideas. I think Albertans back in 2012, when resource revenues were high going into that election, there was a lot. Albertans were looking to have a strategy around surplus management. That obviously hasn't been a problem in recent years, but we're now in a position right now where resource revenues are high. And there needs to be a strategy to make sure that those dollars are managed wisely for surpluses. And I think this is an approach that most Albertans will gel with if they take some time to look and reflect on it.
Now, as we have this conversation, we want to hear from you as well. We have a wide range of folks on this call with us today, from the business community, from post-secondary community, as well as from other organizations. We want to hear your perspectives. We want to get your questions so our experts can address what's lingering in your mind as your organizations went through these budget documents. Now, of course, it's not just the UCP this budget impacts politically. The NDP, we're very quick to criticize many aspects of it. Bill, when the NDP look at this budget and look at the election campaign, are there opportunities for them here to score some political points and maybe push their agenda forward?
Well, I think this budget actually forces the NDP to recalibrate their thinking on what their winning issues are heading into this election. When I look at where they've spent a lot of their energy and focus, holding government to account as the official opposition over the last couple of years, a lot of that has had to do with healthcare and education. So I think that this budget has been quite intentionally designed to head off at the pass or inoculate against those, perhaps more obvious wedge issues. You've heard Premier Smith go so far as to say that, investing in public healthcare is something that her and Rachel Notley agree on. So, I think it actually forces the NDP to dig a little bit deeper and look for other wedge issues that they can look to define the political discourse around heading into this election.
Taleesha, I want to go back sort of on the question I asked you before about the election campaign. We are seeing a big spending increase in this budget. When you look at it, it's especially when compared to the budget that was tabled this time last year. Obviously, resource revenues are different, revenues are up, and spending priorities are different now. But there's not really anything big and splashy, or nothing really eye-grabbing. Do you think the UCP missed an opportunity with this pre-election budget? I'm sure a lot of people were expecting, okay, we're going to see a spend here.
Yeah, and I think, while this budget was highly anticipated to be an exciting kickoff almost to the campaign and to the platform more generally, I expect that this was exactly that, a kickoff, but less the word exciting, right? It really didn't have that excitement that I think people were looking for. Given this was how they decided to frame the budget, I anticipate that they will kind of take the same tone and approach throughout the campaign, boring, but focused on kind of the key policy areas that the electorate really care about. There will likely be, individual announcements throughout the campaign that may receive a bit more fanfare because they are, individualized and kind of almost daily announcements that happen throughout a campaign and standalone. But I think that, given the toned down, boring budget, my prediction would be kind of a continuation of this during the campaign. Was it a missed opportunity? I actually think, no, this was highly intentional, and this was what they wanted to do. They wanted to keep it quiet. They wanted to keep it to a point where, people weren't paying attention, and people, it's not drawing the eyes of voters. And that's actually the best strategy for Premier Smith at this point is, this is what the UCP has been, predictable, stable. This is what you're going to continue to get with us, rather than drawing a ton of attention to a document that they don't want people to see, or not want to see, but not want to provide a lot of excitement over.
Once again, please, if you have any questions while you're watching this, I want to get the opinion of any of our experts. There is the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. You can put your questions in there and we will get them to the expert panelists. Evan, I want to talk to you a little bit about, and here's the advantage of Crestview Strategy. We have a wide range of experts across a number of different practices. Evan works in the campaigns side of things. It's a very tight window before the provincial election. We have a month of session here before we really break down into the election campaign. How should organizations be approaching getting their message out there, trying to get the attention of government on funding priorities in the short window, as well as policy development ideas when it comes to campaign? What sort of tools, what sort of tactics should they be taking?
Yeah, it's the timelines that we have here is that the government will want to pass their budget over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Then we have April, and then May is when the election will be held at the end of the month, and so the election will be called at the beginning of May. So window for policy change is pretty narrow, and it's likely unachievable at this point for any sort of legislative points. As Taleesha had mentioned in her analysis on the budget, the government's trying to, I think, wisely bore the opposition out of existence, make it really hard for them to sharpen their tools. And they've put out enough spending elements in there to make sure that almost every stakeholder, major stakeholder, I should say, is somewhat taken care of. And so your chance for policy change at a legislative or amendments level is probably past. But definitely a good time to begin engaging with both parties on their platform development. As Taleesha had mentioned, there's likely new pieces to come up for the UCP. There's quite a bit of time before the scheduled election will be called. They'll likely want to keep the positive momentum of good news stories going out. So if there are opportunities in the budget you could see where you could help tell those stories, that's certainly an opportunity there. But right now, I'd certainly go into engagement with both parties. I know certainly working on the party side back in the day as well, any ideas are welcome. The staff will be excited to hear from you. And I would definitely advise if you have platform ideas that you think would benefit Albertans, especially on those areas of healthcare, affordability, jobs. Now is a really good time to reach out to make sure that there's bipartisan consensus on your issues.
Yeah, Bill, Taleesha, I want to get your opinions on this as well. You work on the government relations side of things. When you're having these conversations with not just government members, but as well as opposition members, I mean, how fleshed out should these ideas be? How big of a document? How grand should these ideas be as they go to have these conversations with these members?
Look, I think Evan hit the nail on the head that, right now, when you're engaging elected officials, being able to present your issue through the lens of how it impacts or benefits voters, Albertans, is I think the key to being successful in those types of engagements. Evan's advice around bipartisan engagement also very important, especially at this point in the electoral calendar, right? And remembering that regardless of the outcome of this election, whether it's a re-elected UCP government or an NDP government that announces a new cabinet in June, you can't take for granted that if you've got open policy issues, discussions that are ongoing with government right now, you're going to have to work to re-engage those swiftly. And you can't take for granted that policy exercises that may be ongoing at this point in time will necessarily remain priorities in a post-election context. This election will have a defining issue set unto itself. This budget is obviously a significant context for what the policy issues are that are going to matter and sort of shape that political discourse that we'll see unfold over the next couple of months. But June is going to be a whole new day for advancing your policy issues with government.
Yeah, I would only add that, finding unique opportunities, right? Right now, it's all kind of going to be shifting to that platform development and campaign preparation, and really finding unique opportunities to engage with folks, whether that maybe it is just attending, an event where a minister or someone's already going to be, and finding those opportunities to align your priorities with the government. But then, even during a campaign, finding if, platform opportunities that connect with parties, there might be opportunities to, hold some sort of function with the premier or with, Rachel Notley. There might be opportunities that you can find for that. The campaign, sure, a lot of times it is a bit of a wash period in a lot of ways for, the typical engagement that we see, but it doesn't mean that there's not ways to find opportunities to either engage with the premier or engage with individual UCP or NDP candidates in unique ways.
Yesterday was a different day in that not only did Alberta table its 2023 budget, British Columbia did as well. Strange day where we've got so much going on in the political world out here in the West, all at the exact same time. We got a question from one of our attendees here. In comparison to the BC budget, which was very supportive of families struggling with inflation and cost of food in those areas, are there any commitments to food security or food programming in schools from this budget? And do you think support for youth and families facing food insecurity will be a component of the election platforms? We are seeing support for families from the provincial government, but do you think that is going to be a dominant theme, and particularly around food security, as we go into May in the election campaign?
Well, I did note that yesterday's budget included a $20 million commitment to food banks and civil society organizations. So I think it's safe to say that, it's being addressed as a line item. But yeah, like, it's a great question and it's very topical, right? Because the issue set around inflation and affordability, I think we've seen emerge as like a defining policy issue, right? For not only Alberta, but other provinces across the country. I think that's why you saw Smith take really early, swift action on that $2.8 billion inflation relief or affordability package for Albertans. You saw a lot of that sort of repurposed in yesterday's budget. And I expect that's something that they're going to continue talking a lot about. I mean, the $100 a month payments to Alberta families and seniors are ongoing, right? I mean, that's something that the NDP you've seen have already sort of started to make a bit of a pre-election issue, pointing out in their post-budget commentary yesterday that these payments are set to expire in June, right? So the question of what is next, I think, will be one that both parties are going to have to tackle in their platforms.
Yeah, and I would add too, there was also the inclusion of a 20% increase to what they call the school nutrition grant. So that kind of aligns with the question as well. So this was a pre-existing program, but due to inflationary pressures, they've increased that by 20% for this fiscal year as well. So I do think you're going to see that. You're going to see, I think, a focus on families in particular. I think that's going to be a target voter base for the UCP, and it always has been. But I think that, Premier Smith recognizes that. And I think that, obviously there was a focus on the, what Bill mentioned in the fall around the inflation measures. We saw it in the budget yesterday. I think we're going to continue to see an increase on that. Of course, it's a very different party than what the NDP and BC are. And so they're going to take, just by nature of the parties themselves, take different approaches to how they maybe support, families and those in need with the food security piece. But I do think that there's going to be a continuation of that. It's something that the NDP here in Alberta will probably focus more heavily on, I would assume.
On the spending side of things, sorry, Evan, did you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to add, there's other pieces too in the budget. I'm sure folks in the government would point to. One of the pieces that stuck out for me was indexing the Alberta Child and Family Benefit to inflation. That's not a cheap line item. It's just looking at it now, $361 million over 3 years as one of the components, as well as $100 per month for 6 months for each child under 18, which was previously announced. So these are other components, as well as we'd mentioned earlier. Just about every component of this budget is to try and address issues around affordability and to make sure that just about every major stakeholder group or concern that governments would typically hear about, that they're trying to address those concerns.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. If anyone else has any questions they'd like to throw into the Q&A section, we are happy to throw them to our experts and get our perspective on this. I want to bring back up a point that we brought up earlier. Spending is up significantly, not just in health and education, but really across the board. This was after a number of years of restraint on spending and really trying to hold it back. Does the government risk anything with the more fiscal conservative base that it has in this spending, or does the fact that this fiscal framework is being put in place and there are still budget surpluses in the fiscal plan for the next 3 years, does that guard against any of that criticism for this party on the campaign trail, do you think?
I think this budget strikes a very deliberate balance between this new fiscal framework, which sets rules around how surpluses will be dealt with in the future. But they're not. I don't think they've been shy on spending in this budget either. So they've allocated significant money to what I would consider, some very obvious ministries, right? Including health, education. We talked about the capital plan, the infrastructure that will be built, with this budget. So I think that, you know, there's a bit of a deliberate play to you know, balance those things against each other, right? Where you can sort of say, look, you know, here are the significant investments that we know need to be made, but here's how we'll you know, moderate the way that, you know, government can use these surpluses in the future.
Finance Minister
I would only add.
Sorry,
I'd only add to that I think for fiscal conservatives in the party right now, their time to put their foot down is not now. They've got some wins in how the surplus is managed. They have a surplus. But the political reality is that the UCP are neck and neck with the NDP. They're months away from an election. They have even if they wanted to restrict spending in this budget, their arguments at the table within caucus or elsewhere would not have much of an ear. Folks want to win in government, and the pathway to winning right now, especially when resource revenues are high, is not to be seen to be holding back on important issues that Albertans are concerned about, like healthcare and education.
To not have a plan to spend this surplus would be a major political risk for government heading into an election, right? You know, like if they were to you know, have to face off against the NDP and make the case for why they haven't spent money on, you know, issues that matter most to voters, matter most to Albertans, you know, affordability, healthcare, then, you know, that would be a tough campaign, right? So I think they've been very intentional in trying to strike a balance between these things.
Another question from one of our viewers. It's interesting to note that the themes carrying over in this budget, many of them from the Wildrose days, as we spoke about earlier. Is there anything else that you guys see in this budget or perhaps foresee coming into the election platform that will harken back to Danielle Smith's days as opposition leader in the Wildrose Party?
The thing that would stick out to me is when it comes to healthcare reform, we've already heard some of these major ideas, especially, you know, the Jason Kenney government, they promised the Alberta Surgical Wait Time Initiative. A lot of that was framed on the previous iterations of Wildrose campaign promises about the Alberta Wait Time Guarantee. So I think on the healthcare file, and these issues have traditionally pulled very well with Albertans, that they want to see solutions to actually reduce wait times when it comes to major surgical areas like hip replacement or knee replacement. So I'll be interested to watch to see if there's a little bit more meat on the bone or a new iteration of that coming forward. But other than that, this last fiscal surplus management piece is one of the last holdouts from old Wildrose policy that haven't made their way into government. On democratic reform, a lot of the old pieces like MLA recall or referenda legislation, that's now in place under the Jason Kenney government. A lot of reforms regarding choice in education and protections around that have been put in place as well. So there's not too much else to pull, to be honest, from the old Wildrose platform playbooks outside of these pieces that we've seen in the budget.
One of my last assignments while I was in my last career at Global News was right after Premier Danielle Smith was selected as the leader of the UCP, and her first public presentation was to the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, and I attended that. And speaking about healthcare, she said, look, we're going to make some changes. It's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for the next little while, but we're getting to a place where we feel that the province is going to be able to improve its healthcare system. Now, since that time, it really hasn't been too many big changes, big, bold moves by this provincial government. They've been making investments and making announcements. I think of the primary care one that they've committed to in this budget. Taleesha, I want to get your perspective on this. Do you think there's more to come when it comes to healthcare reform? We're soon going to see a new CEO and the administrator still doing his work. What do you think the path forward is and through this election campaign? And what's the strategy for a win when it comes to the UCP on that front?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I think that it's going to be completely, that in inflation and affordability is going to be completely essential to the campaign, as we've all said. On the healthcare side of things, I think it's going to be a continued kind of focus on reform and kind of scaling back AHS, taking out some of the bureaucratic nature, which they, that was one of the first things that the new premier put in place. So I think there's going to be a continued reform of AHS, which has been, a longstanding, of course, concern and issue for Albertans. But in addition to that, I think the focus on emergency wait times, EMS, there's just going to be, that is going to be, I think, a completely shape the narrative of the campaign for both the NDP and the UCP. It's something that I think every Albertan knows someone or has been, unfortunately had, concerns with over the last few months, and knows someone personally who may have, waited for 11 hours at an emergency wait room, or someone who, had to wait 2 hours for an ambulance. So that's going to be a big focus, I think. As much as it's looking like the UCP have rural Alberta locked up, I think there's still going to be a focus on that as it relates to healthcare. So there, of course, at Calgary and Edmonton, there will be, but it's going to be something that they focus on, particularly with the EMS piece of it, because it's been something that not even just for the last, year that's been a concern. It's been something for the last many, many years that people have been speaking about and have had concerns about. So that's going to be a shift from, the approach that even Premier Kenney took as it relates to healthcare generally, but particularly on EMS and emergency wait times.
Bill, on rural healthcare, the NDP have been speaking quite a bit about that over the last number of years. Are there inroads they can make, do you see, in rural Alberta when it comes to the healthcare issue, where a lot of hospitals have seen bed closures, services like obstetrics removed for either months at a time or even just weekends at a time? Is there a path for them to gain support on this issue, do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's this issue of rural healthcare delivery is not a new one in Alberta. This is something that we see, I think as a bit of a constant. Look, Premier Smith has made some really big bets on healthcare, right? She just last week, ahead of budget, provided an update on the sort of 90-day progress on their healthcare action plan, which is effectively their sort of like four-prong commitment to improving healthcare delivery. And one of these really key, I think, indicators of how they can measure that success is things like what is the EMS response time in rural communities, right? So I think they're trying their best to sort of put some metrics on the table and be able to demonstrate success. But ultimately, what's required is significant capital investment to ensure that rural regional centers have the same type of infrastructure and ability to deliver primary care that urban centers currently do, right? And that's a challenge in a province as large and as spread out as Alberta is, but it's one that both parties are going to have to have answers for voters in the context of their election.
We have about 15 minutes left. If anybody has any questions, feel free to stick them in the Q&A portion. It's at the bottom of your screen. I want to switch to some economic development questions here. In this budget, we saw the introduction of a new agri-processing tax credit for anyone who is investing more than $10 million in an agri-food processing project here in Alberta. There's also the expansion of the Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program, additional funding coming in the fiscal 2025 on that front. Finance Minister Travis Toews says, look, to have a prosperous Alberta, you need to lay the conditions out for investment and job creation. This budget, those are the steps that we're taking, as well as keeping the low tax environment. Do you think there's enough here for the business community to see opportunities to advance? Do you think we need to have further discussions? What do we see in this document on that front?
Well, I think that some of the policies you just alluded to, Tom, really speak to this government's worldview on like what actually grows the economy. I think that some of the foundational policy changes that were made in the early days of Jason Kenney's government, like setting the most competitive corporate tax rate in the country, putting together a very focused program on reducing red tape to make it easier for businesses, citizens to access government services and decisions. So I think that their policy here is I think less to pick winners and losers and more to try and create the environment for competition and investment. But there are still some very focused investments that are alluded to in this budget. I think about the I think about the Alberta Technology and Innovation Strategy, and the nearly $25 million that's been allocated towards that. It'll be really interesting to see sort of where those investments are placed on a sector basis, because that'll tell us a lot about where this government thinks are growth areas for our economy.
Yeah, I would only add that it's been interesting to kind of see a lot of the carryover from the Kenney days in terms of these kinds of policies around technology and innovation and fintech and the clean tech, all of these kind of driving new investment policies that were put in place. I think that there was definitely less of a focus on this in this budget. I think that the last 3 budgets we saw a lot of fanfare around driving technology companies to Alberta, specifically downtown Calgary and Edmonton, and trying to bring that new kind of industries into the province. I think that despite that, we're still seeing investments in it. But I think that the UCP understands that the business community cares about this, and of course the business community is going to vote, but is it what they genuinely are voting on? Maybe not this election. I think that we're going to see a continued focus on it, but this was a Kenney brand thing. This isn't a Smith brand kind of area, and so I think she still views it as important, but it's not going to be the big focus of this government, regardless of if they win or not in May.
If I could jump in here too on the politics of the moment with regards to some of these policies, it's no surprise that Rachel Notley and the NDP again this week reinforced that they plan to raise the corporate tax rate. Now, when they used that, it was a bit of an advance that policy in the 2015 election. That was when Albertans were searching for solutions about how to handle a $6 billion deficit. And the Prentice government at the time had some tax hikes on regular folks, including gas tax hikes and other items. And the corporate tax rate seemed like an appealing election platform piece on the NDP side. I'm wondering how much damage that would actually do to the NDP brand as they're trying to make advancements in Calgary specifically about their economic bona fides. If they're going to keep talking about raising the corporate tax rate, I think the UCP smell blood there, and they'll be wanting to frame their policy of keeping Alberta's corporate and business environment having the most competitive tax rates. Certainly in Canada, among the best in North America, against the NDP pledge to raise corporate tax rates. We already have a surplus. What's the need to gain more money out of corporations? There's a segment of the population for sure who will find that policy appetizing, but when the government's spending money on all the priorities that Albertans are talking about, what's the need for that corporate tax rate? So I'll be interested. That will be a key battle in the months ahead, and I think folks in the business and investment community will be watching.
It will be interesting to see what the NDP come forward with. They're, of course, working with former ATB chief economist Todd Hirsch on their economic plan as they develop their policy platforms. On the film and television front, I don't know how many of the participants, folks watching, are watching The Last of Us, but obviously a big win for Alberta. We're seeing that landscape. One of the other investments in this budget is the film and TV tax credit. How much excitement? I mean, you guys are in Calgary, Evan and Taleesha. How much excitement is there in that industry right now in Calgary as we see big productions like that one, and really, I mean, Ghostbusters was filmed all across Southern Alberta as well. Is there a real vibe going on in that industry right now in Calgary?
I can only speak on behalf of my sister, who's deeply involved in the film and arts community, but I'd certainly say that we're having a moment right now, and that folks in the cultural sector and the film sector are very excited and proud of the product and the work and the talent that we have locally. And so I think for the government, and I think the NDP will try and take credit for some of the work that they did while they were in government about attracting work for the film sector as well. But I certainly think we're having a moment. I believe moments where Albertans are gathering around the TV and watching a massive series like The Last of Us and seeing locations that they're familiar with, it will instill a real sense of pride. And, when governments are trying to make arguments around diversification, it's always nice to have proof points. In this case, where Albertans can have this sort of emotive attachment to a film or a show like The Last of Us, and when the government says we are diversifying and they can see that tangibly in front of themselves, I think it's a real boost to the government or any party who's trying to make an argument about advancing diversification.
Yeah, and I would say, my colleagues know that I watch almost nothing, but because of the Alberta thing, I was like, you know what, I want to watch The Last of Us. So I watched it, and not only did it draw you in because of the Alberta folks, and I think that's the case for probably a lot of Albertans are watching. I usually wouldn't watch a zombie show, but because of the Alberta focus and the kind of pride and excitement over that, it's drawing people in, and it's drawing people into being excited about the potential for other, large productions like this to be in the Alberta, part of the Alberta economy, and kind of growing that. I think for so long, Canadians have kind of really seen Vancouver and Toronto as, our film and television hubs, and especially for folks coming down from the States, that's where people went. But this ties back to what I was saying around kind of a Kenny focus on those areas. And, sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And this tax credit piece is something that I think has actually been very, very beneficial, but also palatable for international investment into Alberta.
I got another question in the Q&A section here, and I was actually going to go down this path myself. In the United States, we saw the Inflation Reduction Act really ramp up enticements for industry to invest in green tech in that country. And it's really changing the conversation up here on how do we ensure that we get a piece of that economic pie as well. The question that's been thrown in here is, were there any announcements related to transit as well as electrification infrastructure in Alberta? And what should we look at when it comes to conversations on that front, as well as how do we entice this sort of investment here, particularly in light of what's happening south of the border?
Mm-hmm. So, I did see a couple of line items in there. I believe there's a $16 million envelope for municipalities to support municipalities in delivering transit infrastructure. There was also a specific allocation that I think would go to the city of Calgary to facilitate a study of light rail transit between downtown and the Calgary airport. So those are two, sort of transit related investments that stick out to me. The question about the Inflation Reduction Act and what Alberta is doing to put incentives in the window for industries like clean technology, hydrogen, and that sort of part of economic diversification. Like Taleesha made the point earlier, like this budget was actually fairly light on what I would call, resource sector, clean tech policy initiatives and investments. I actually expect that we're going to see a number of those policy priorities outlined in what Premier Smith has alluded to as a soon to be released Alberta Emissions Reduction and Energy Development Plan. So this is something that I think government is looking at tackling in a post-budget context that would give them something to, really put in the window as framing their thinking on clean technology, and how you invest in technology solutions to get to net zero, which is what Smith has talked about as her preferred policy solution in juxtaposition with what the federal government's doing, right, which is setting emissions targets. She's said, we don't think those are achievable. We think that getting to net zero requires investments in clean tech. But this budget doesn't outline a plan to do that. We're still waiting to see what's coming on that front.
We have about 5 to 7 minutes left. If anybody else wants to get some last minute questions in on this expert panel. I was at a Tourism Industry Association event this week, and Premier Smith actually spoke at it yesterday morning ahead of the budget being tabled. And the tourism industry folks were speaking a lot about investments in infrastructure and ensuring that we have the infrastructure in place for people not only to get to Alberta, but also to get around Alberta to see different sites. And the line that Premier Smith used in the speech was, look, we're looking at all this, but you wanted to manage expectations with this budget. And I remember thinking yesterday morning when she said this, going, an election budget, and we're managing expectations. We've spoken a lot about that. Evan, I want to get you on this one because you obviously worked with the Wild Rose Party when she was in that position there. Was there anything in this budget that surprised you that you went and looked at and went, I didn't think that I would see this in a Danielle Smith budget? Was there anything there that caught you off guard?
Well, to start, the pace of the spend increase was quite high. I could imagine if this was a PC government and there was a wild rose in the opposition benches, the first thing that they would have said is spending is out of control. This is NDP style spending. In fact, I saw a tweet by University of Calgary economist Trevor Toom mentioning that the 2019 NDP budget, their expectations for where they'd be at in spending at this point in 2023, the UCP are actually spending more than the NDP had planned in 2019. Now, of course, there was the pandemic. But the spend is a big deal. Like we're blessed right now to have good resource revenues, and Albertans are lucky to have it. But that's not something that I would have expected or planned for to see with the Danielle Smith government. Other than that, yeah, I mean, there's not much that sticks out that I think is a natural contradiction with Danielle Smith's thinking. So I haven't been shocked by anything that contradicts where she's been in the past. I mean, we were talking about the tourism industry, about ways to get around. I'm curious if there are some things that they don't want to be too committal on because it's just not where normal Albertans' heads are at. While it could be appealing from an economic diversification front, that they really had to make sure that they streamlined their focus on any major spending pieces on the places that matter, affordability, making sure that Albertans have more money in their jeans, making sure that our healthcare system is seeing an increase in funding, that there's more staffing levels, that folks can see that staffing and those concerns about the frontline services are being addressed.
We just have a few minutes left here, so I want to give this to each of you. We'll start with Taleesha, then go to Bill and Evan on this. For those watching, whether they be in post-secondary, whether they be in business or some other form of organization, what one piece of advice do you have for them to approach government, to approach opposition, and to approach the provincial election? Taleesha, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I would say similar to what I said earlier, take a bit of a unique approach, right? Government gets, or ministers get, 10 meeting requests a day, and try to find a unique angle to what you're trying to get across to government, whether that is, finding an opportunity to align with the mandates specifically of government. So really that's where I always, advise clients is to find ways where what you're asking for of government aligns very specifically and targeted with, the ministerial mandates of government. During an election period, obviously, again, more challenging, but look at what the priorities are of each party and try to find ways to, align your communications and align your messaging with those parties that you're looking to potentially get in front of.
Bill.
For folks who are joining us today that have, business with government, policy issues that you lobby about, you are entering a really unique time from a relationship building standpoint, because in the 4 years between elections, it can be really difficult to show up at a minister's office and sort of plant your flag for your issue and make your case without having planted the seeds or built some awareness and profile for your issue and for yourself with decision makers. And ultimately, we're entering a period where decision making is coming to an end, and campaigning is really starting to ramp up. So this means that the folks who are going to be in the next cabinet, whether that's an NDP cabinet or a UCP cabinet, are all running for election or for re-election very shortly, which means they're going to be more uniquely accessible to show up at community events, to show up at fundraisers, to show up, even at their campaign offices, to go and introduce yourself and to start doing that relationship building that will come in very handy when you're trying to influence decisions and actually access these folks in a post-election context.
Evan.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on top of Bill. I mean, this is really, we're in a window now where our engagement is focusing on pretty quickly on what the election will be like. There are folks in both parties who are trying to garner up ideas about what the platform should look like and what their plans post-election should look like. So having those conversations now and beginning to frame it in your favor is certainly something we advise, and yeah, it will be interesting to watch. We've got yeah, end of May here. This will go by pretty quick. I saw a note both from the NDP and UCP on their fundraising asks via email. They're counting down the days, and I think both parties now will have a pretty structured calendar when it comes to what announcements they're making. I expect shortly after the budget's done, you'll start seeing the NDP hit the ground pretty hard as well. So you'll need to take into consideration what they might be announcing, and keep an eye out for that as well.
Well, it is, we are at time. If any of our viewers here need any help or strategic advice when it comes to putting your agenda forward to politicians of all political stripe here in the province and across the country, we are a full service firm here at Crestview Strategy. We offer everything from government relations to campaign support to research to strategic communications. If you'd like a customized conversation on what's next and what we can offer, you can send any of us an email. Our contact information is on the screen there for you. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We really do appreciate it. And it's going to be an interesting month of session, month of April, where I assume we'll see a lot of announcements, and then off and running for the provincial election in May. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll hope to talk to you again soon.